I used to think national parks were escapes until I realized the wilderness doesn't care what you think it is. From a videographer who kept walking toward a grizzly, to a woman who stepped past a barrier onto collapsing ground, ending in the most violent way imaginable. Nathan here, and welcome back to Fatal Files. On Tuesday, July 22, 2016, Harris Vogt was walking through Glacier National Park the way he always walked through Glacier National Park. Slow, intentional, filming himself doing it. He was a wildlife buff who'd turned freelance videographer with a reputation and fan base built upon footage daringly perilous. A chest cam mounted his perspective, while the video from a secondary handheld rig rushed in for tighter, more dangerous shots. Standing just off camera was his producer, Dina Marsh, 31. She oversaw operations and logistics for his shoots and, more often than not, served as his voice of reason to how crazy he was willing to push things. They had worked together for 2 years at that point. Familiar partners, they functioned well inside that tension, nearly always disagreeing about where the line was, but accustomed to pushing right up against it. That morning, Glacier was mid-season on one of its worst dry spells in recent memory. By sunrise, the temperature hovered past 80 degrees Fahrenheit, with hardly a whisper of wind. On trails, vegetation grew dry and thick, cracking underfoot and obscuring vision. In bear country, it narrows your margin for both distance and reaction time. Temporary warning signs had been posted at the trailhead that morning after rangers found fresh bear sign. Tracks, scat, disturbed vegetation within 300 yards of the path. Harris read it and kept moving. Dina photographed it. A group of hikers had already stopped along the trail, pointing upslope. A sow grizzly with 2 cubs was feeding in the brush above, maybe 150 to 200 yards out. Harris arrived, assessed the scene, and stepped off the trail entirely, moving uphill through the brush. Dina stayed at the trail edge. What passed between them in those few seconds, whether there was an argument, whether he waved her off, no one else was close enough to hear. What other hikers saw was Harris moving uphill and Dina not following. He repositioned several times to eliminate foreground branches from the shot. By the time he settled, witnesses estimated he had closed the distance to roughly 60 feet from the sow. 60 feet! That is not a buffer. That is barely enough space to register what's happening before it's already happening. He held his position while the bear signaled, through every means a grizzly has, that she knew he was there. Audible huffing, then jaw-popping, the sound grizzlies make when they move from annoyed to threatened. Dina, from the trail below, called out for him to back away. Harris didn't move. He was framing the shot, and the sow was framing him. She had 2 cubs behind her and a stranger at 60 feet who wasn't leaving. The charge came without extended warning, out of the brush and closing ground before anyone had time to process it. Witnesses described the distance collapsing in roughly 2 seconds. At 60 feet, that's not a chase, that's an arrival. Harris pivoted downhill while still holding his camera. The slope was loose rock and dry soil that gives way under sudden movement. He lost traction almost immediately and was still going down when the bear reached him. The struggle lasted seconds. High-intensity contact focused on the head and upper torso. The bear disengaged once Harris stopped moving and returned upslope without further pursuit. Dina was still on the trail when it happened. She had watched him go up. She had called out. She was standing there when the brush stopped moving. Rangers and medical responders reached the site, but the injuries were not survivable. Investigators concluded Harris had closed to roughly 60 feet from a sow with cubs and triggered a defensive charge by reducing that margin past what the bear could tolerate. The sow was not relocated or euthanized. Dina Marsh provided a formal statement and left the park the following morning. The park was quiet again within the week. The trail reopened, the signs went back up, and hikers moved through that same stretch like nothing had happened. The place doesn't change. Only the person is gone, and Dina Marsh got to go home carrying every one of those steps with her. The barrier between Harris and that bear wasn't a fence. It was just a decision he kept making, one step at a time. The next case is different in almost every way, except for that. And this time, the ground itself gave way. Nancy Trawl, 41, had built her entire platform on going where most people stop. Volcano rims, canyon edges, places where the view only sharpens if you're willing to get closer than you should. At Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, she wasn't improvising. She had spent 2 days working the terrain, posting 3 pieces already, each one carefully framed, paced, and edited for impact. The 4th was supposed to be the strongest, the one that made people pause mid-scroll. She was constructing it that morning. She never uploaded it. By then, the park was defined by active volcanic conditions. The crater overlook carried the sharp, chemical bite of sulfur dioxide, heat lifting off the hardened lava in visible waves. Steam pushed through fissures along the rim, and far below, a faint glow pulsed from within the crater. Rangers had installed rope barriers roughly 25 feet back after detecting ground cracking and subsurface voids near the edge. It wasn't a suggestion. It marked where the ground stopped being reliable. From behind it, the angle flattened. The glow disappeared. For most visitors, that was enough. For Nancy, it wasn't. She stepped past the barrier while others stayed behind, some of them already filming the crater itself. On the far side, she moved along a narrow strip of hardened crust between the rope and the rim, following a slightly sloped lip where footing turned uneven. The surface beneath her was fractured, fine, hairline separations where the crust had already begun pulling away. She adjusted her position, leaning forward to clear the angle. The ground failed without transition. The section beneath her gave way along an existing fracture line. No shift, no warning, just separation. She dropped onto the inner slope, striking jagged volcanic rock before the descent took over. The incline, estimated between 30 and 45 degrees, was layered with loose, heat-weakened material that broke apart under pressure. She tried to stop the slide, but there was nothing stable to catch. Rock moved with her. So did dust. Within seconds, she was carried into a dense band of rising steam and volcanic gas, venting along the slope. From above, visibility collapsed. One moment she was there. The next, the steam closed and erased the line of sight. That's the part that holds. The barrier was placed because the ground beyond it had already started to fail. Nancy wasn't careless. She was experienced, used to reading terrain, used to calculating risk. But volcanic crust doesn't give feedback. It doesn't flex or settle. It holds until it doesn't. And when it goes, it all goes at once. The people watching weren't focused on her. They were filming the crater, the glow, the spectacle, until the moment she became part of it. Authorities were alerted immediately. The overlook was cleared, access restricted. Rescue teams evaluated the descent, but conditions made it impossible. Extreme heat, unstable ground, and dangerous concentrations of volcanic gases eliminated any viable approach. Aerial observation traced the fall path, but couldn't penetrate the steam layer to confirm a location. Investigators later confirmed she had crossed the safety barrier and stepped onto unsupported crust over a known void near the active rim. The collapse aligned with the instability that had prompted the barrier in the first place. Recovery was not possible. The overlook remained closed for several days as geological teams reassessed the site, extending barriers and updating hazard warnings. And somewhere, on devices carried out of the park that day, the footage still exists, captured by people who didn't realize what they were recording until it had already happened. The next case removes even that pull. No glow, no spectacle, just a platform, a line on the ground, and something arriving exactly when it's supposed to. On May 14, 2015, Grand Canyon Railway Depot overflowed with passengers waiting for the arrival of a train. Visibility was clear, signs were posted, and safety warnings were announced. However, people continued to crowd the platform as the train pulled in. Karen Drunt was 29 years old. She worked in retail and was visiting the city from out of state with 2 friends on a weekend trip. She is easygoing and planner, the friend who books the tickets and handles logistics. This was her brainchild. She'd had her phone out half the morning, snapping pictures of anything and everything memorable. Alongside her on the platform was a father traveling with his young son, maybe 5 or 6 years old, restless the way small children get when something loud and large is about to arrive. The boy had been pressing toward the edge of the crowd the entire time the train was announced. His father had pulled him back twice already. When the locomotive became visible down the track, track and the horn started sounding, the boy broke from his father's grip and ran straight past the painted safety line toward the incoming train. Karen was closer to the line than she should have been. She was already in motion before most people on the platform had processed what was happening. She crossed the line, reached the boy, and pushed him back hard toward the platform crowd. The child stumbled clear. A bystander caught him. Karen didn't make it back. I've looked at a lot of these cases, and most of them turn on a moment where someone made a choice that served themselves. A better angle, closer shot, one more step toward something they wanted to see. This one doesn't fit that. Karen moved toward the train because a child was in front of it. That's the thing that makes it hardest to categorize, hardest to file away under any clean lesson about risk and consequence. She knew where the line was. She crossed it anyway. The reason just happened to be someone else. The horn was sounding continuously as the locomotive closed in. Standard protocol from the point the engineer identified figures inside the clearance zone. The train had no ability to deviate and no realistic stopping distance at that stage. The front corner of the locomotive struck Karen as the engine reached her position, knocking her off her feet instantly. The impact redirected her downward alongside the train, where brief secondary contact with the ground occurred before the train's momentum carried it past her. The father was on the platform when it happened. His son was alive in a stranger's arms. He had watched Karen move past him toward the line, had seen her reach his boy, and had seen what it cost her. All of that happened in the span of a few seconds. That detail doesn't need elaboration. Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Karen was confirmed dead at the scene. The conductor's statement, witness accounts, and physical evidence were all consistent with the sequence of events. The investigation returned a ruling of accidental death. No mechanical fault was identified. The engineer had followed correct protocol throughout. What I find myself coming back to is the father. He went home with his son. He will go home with his son for the rest of his life. And somewhere in that is the specific weight of knowing that someone he never met, whose name he learned after the fact, made a decision in about 2 seconds that he will spend the rest of his life accounting for. That's not a clean thing to carry. It isn't supposed to be. After the incident, safety lines were reviewed and signage updated. By the next day, operations had already returned to normal. Karen crossed a line painted right there on the ground. Visible, marked, impossible to miss. The difference is, she crossed it for someone else. Dixie Plink never had that chance. She walked into an abandoned mine in Death Valley and picked up something sitting in the dark for over 100 years. The danger was never visible to begin with. We've got more disturbing national park tragedies coming up, so hit that subscribe button if you want to see how places meant for adventure can turn even deadlier in seconds. By midday, Death Valley was already doing what it does in late winter, temperatures climbing into the mid-80s, a dry heat that pulls moisture out of everything it touches. It was March 18, 2018. Around the park's older mining corridors, the terrain stretched out broken and pale, scattered with the remnants of 1800s extraction, rusted equipment, collapsed timberwork, and tunnel openings carved straight into hillsides, left as they were when operations shut down. Most of those openings are gated or clearly marked. Some aren't. Dixie was 37 years old, and documenting abandoned places was less a hobby and more a dedicated pursuit. She ran an online presence built entirely around forgotten infrastructure, mines, collapsed structures, derelict industrial sites. That morning, she wasn't alone. With her were 2 regular collaborators, Joel Marsh, 34, and Kara Venn, 29. They had a loose system. Dixie shot interiors, Joel handled exterior context, Kara documented from the entrance and managed communication with the surface. It had worked before. It worked right up until it didn't. The tunnel was a partially collapsed remnant of 1800s mining operations, accessible from a point off a marked trail. The interior was low, the walls uneven, the air carrying that specific stillness of enclosed spaces that haven't had meaningful airflow in decades. Joel had stayed outside. Kara had positioned herself just inside the mouth of the tunnel where she could maintain a sight line to both Dixie and the outside. Dixie moved deeper in, further in, positioned in a shaded recess was a partially intact wooden crate. The crate contained multiple cylindrical sticks wrapped in deteriorating paper. Some of them were leaking, a glossy, oily residue pooling at the base, consistent with nitroglycerin seepage from aged dynamite. Over decades of heat cycling in Death Valley, the stabilizing compounds break down and the nitroglycerin migrates outward. What's left becomes extraordinarily sensitive to shock, friction, and movement. The sticks in that crate had been sitting in one of the hottest environments on Earth for well well over a century. Here's the thing that I keep coming back to. Dixie documented abandoned sites regularly. She understood that these spaces carry risk, but I don't think she recognized what she was looking at. Leaking cylindrical sticks in a mining tunnel don't announce themselves. That gap in recognition is what made this fatal, and the people closest to her were positioned exactly where the system they'd built together had put them. She handled the sticks. At some point, one slipped from her grip and dropped a short distance, striking the edge of the crate and the rock beneath it. That was enough. The detonation was instantaneous. Inside a confined tunnel, the blast force amplified significantly. The shockwave dislodged weakened rock along the ceiling and expelled debris outward through the entrance. Kara, just inside the tunnel mouth, was thrown back by the concussive force and sustained injuries to her arm and shoulder. Joel, outside, was knocked off his feet by the pressure wave. He was conscious when rangers reached him. Hikers on a nearby trail reported hearing a sharp blast and observed a dust plume rising from the hillside. Rangers secured the perimeter, while specialists cleared remaining hazards before any recovery operation could begin. Kara gave her statement from a hospital bed. What investigators reconstructed from their accounts was a sequence neither of them had seen direct. Dixie had been around a bend in the tunnel, out of Kara's sightline, for several minutes before the detonation. The system they'd built to keep each other safe had a gap in it, and the gap was exactly where Dixie was standing. Dixie Plink was confirmed dead as a result of the blast and subsequent structural collapse. The tunnel was secured. The crate and its remaining contents were removed and disposed of by qualified personnel. There are an estimated 500,000 abandoned mine openings across the American West. Most of them have never been fully cleared. Death Valley alone has hundreds. Some of what's left inside them has been sitting there since before anyone currently alive was born. Dixie's danger was manufactured, something human hands had made, placed, and left behind. The next case removes even that. No object, no relic, no forgotten artifact. Just the earth itself, dressed up in colors bright enough to look like an invitation. It was August 11th, 2016, and Yellowstone National Park was sitting at the height of its summer season. The Norris Geyser Basin drew crowds that day, the way it always does, not just for the scale of it, but for the color. The pools at Norris bleed into shades of blue and green and yellow that don't look real until you're standing in front of them. The air was thick with sulfur. The ground vented steam in slow, steady exhales. And at every turn, posted at eye level and impossible to miss, were warning signs telling visitors to stay on the boardwalk. Fresh off completing her degree, 25-year-old Tally Grix spent the summer moving alone between national parks, supporting the trip with service industry shifts along the way. Friends described her as someone who either committed fully or not at all, and that showed in how she approached each destination, studying the geology, memorizing the history, understanding the terrain before ever setting foot in it. The night before she reached Norris, she set up camp illegally the basin perimeter, choosing a spot she had identified on trail maps, distant enough from the main path to avoid early ranger patrols. Her goal was to reach the pools at first light, ahead of the crowds, before the smell of sunscreen diluted the sulfur-heavy air. She wasn't uninformed about where she was going. What she failed to weigh was how different that landscape becomes in the dark, especially without the barriers and precautions designed to keep visitors from stepping into something they can't survive. She had broken camp before sunrise and was moving toward the pools when the light was still low and flat. The boardwalk was empty. The warning signs were there. She would have passed them. But in the pre-dawn quiet, with no crowds and no rangers and nothing between her and the basin but open ground, the park felt like it was hers. That feeling is the most dangerous thing Yellowstone produces. More dangerous than the heat, more dangerous than the acid, more dangerous than the crust that looks solid until it isn't. Rangers had no record of her presence that morning. No one on the boardwalk had seen her arrive. The first indication that anything had happened came from a pair of early visitors who reached the basin shortly after dawn and noticed a section of disturbed crust roughly 30 feet from the nearest boardwalk edge. A collapsed area roughly 1 to 2 feet wide, with thermal water visible below. They flagged a ranger immediately. What investigators pieced together came entirely from physical evidence. Tally's gear was found at the illegal campsite inside the perimeter. Her trail showed she had approached the pools from an off-path direction, moving across open geothermal crust in low light without the visual reference points the boardwalk provides. A collapsed section of crust, thermal water below, her belongings on one side of the basin and nothing recoverable on the other. The investigation did not produce a witness account because there was no witness. What happened in the minutes before that crust gave way, nobody saw. What happened after, nobody could reach. This is the part I keep turning over. Tally knew things. She had done the research. She understood the basin better than most visitors who passed through it on a guided tour. But knowledge of a place and permission to move through it without its safety infrastructure are two different things entirely. She didn't wander off the boardwalk because she didn't notice it. She camped inside the perimeter the night before so she could be out there before the boardwalk mattered. That's not carelessness. That's a deliberate plan that treated the park's safety systems as an obstacle rather than the reason anyone gets to walk out of Norris at all. Recovery crews face the same conditions that make Norris dangerous in the first place: unstable crust, near boiling water, corrosive acidity. A timely recovery was not possible. The area was cordoned off. Rangers noted that the illegal campsite indicated premeditated overnight presence inside a restricted zone, which added a separate dimension to the investigation beyond the thermal incident itself. Tally Grix did not survive. The warning signage at Norris is among the most explicit in the entire park, posted at frequent intervals, written in plain language, impossible to miss from anywhere on the path. Tally had walked past all of it the night before and made camp anyway. That's not the same as not seeing it. That's something harder to explain and harder to sit with. The boardwalks at Yellowstone are not bureaucratic caution. They are the line between ground that will hold you and ground that will not. The crust does not grade on confidence or preparation or intent, and it doesn't care whether anyone is watching.